I'm joined live now by Hanan Ashrawi, former member of the PLO Executive Committee. She's in Ramallah in the West Bank. So, Hanan, I just want to get your take. I'm not sure if you heard my previous guests, what they were saying, but before we get into all of that, I just want to get your take as a Palestinian who lives in the West Bank in terms of what's happened and what is happening in Gaza. You've seen this story play out many, many times before. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think everything that we discuss has to be contextualized. And the key word here is the occupation, an unaccountable, brutal, lethal military occupation in which Israel exercises unbridled power against a captive Palestinian population. It commits war crimes by stealing land, by building more settlements, by stealing our resources, controlling our lives, using military means to subdue a people and to rob us of all our rights, actually. And so in that context, this is an abnormal situation, and it has been ongoing. It has been escalating, yes, with the Trump administration joining in the crime of the occupation, enabling Netanyahu, the whole situation moving to the extreme right and to the racist Jewish supremacist right. These things have been happening, and especially now recently targeting Jerusalem. As you know, they inflame religious feelings. And that is what started this whole latest, as you said, episode, this latest escalation.
Hanan, let me ask you this, because as I was mentioning to my previous guest, the people of Gaza, innocent civilians are suffering. We know that. The world, certain members of the world are watching in horror. 84 people have been killed, including 18 children. This is just heartbreaking for anybody to watch. When you talk to some people in Israeli society, they say that people in Israel, yes, of course, they are used to, although I'm not sure you ever get used to, but somewhat used to rockets being fired by Hamas. However, when you have Hamas firing rockets into Jerusalem specifically and into places like Tel Aviv, Greater Tel Aviv, that is a red line. And they knew that the Israeli response to that would be great. What is your response to that?
Well, they were cautioned. They were told repeatedly not to target Al-Aqsa Mosque, not to target worshippers, not to target even the Easter celebrations and processions in Jerusalem, not to provoke the Palestinians beyond endurance. And of course they did. And the evictions and kicking out Palestinians from their homes, again, during the holy month of Ramadan, there was this concerted effort to provoke everybody. And Hamas said, hands off Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Haram al-Sharif, hands off Jerusalem, stop these things. And they gave them one deadline after the other, and they refused. Netanyahu is the one who's cynically exploiting the situation for his own political ends, and in order to avoid going to prison, because he is indicted on 3 charges of corruption. So he's manipulating the whole system in order to stay in power. He has empowered the extremist, racist, violent people, the Lahava group and the Kahanas in Israel, who are going around shouting death to the Arabs and who are creating confrontations and beating up people and going around acting like thugs.
And then just to play devil's advocate for a second, because, you know, obviously you have your perspective in terms of what fueled the violence, particularly around the Al-Aqsa Mosque. However, on the Israeli side, they believe that they did do a lot to try and de-escalate the situation. They believe that by postponing or at least rerouting the Jerusalem Day Parade, that sent a message that they were willing to de-escalate things. And also in terms of the eviction ruling, they postponed that ruling by 30 days to give things a chance to calm down on both sides. So do you acknowledge at least that the Israelis made some kind of an attempt to prevent all of this?
Well, maybe we should look at the truth. The parade was ongoing. And yes, they rerouted it, but the only way it stopped was because of the early warning or the air raid warning signal, in which then the people who were starting on the parade decided to run away. That's one thing. But you cannot postpone a crime. You cannot say we will postpone evictions till next week. I mean, we've seen this before. We've seen how they postpone things and then carry them out. On all the settlement projects, on all the ethnic cleansing projects in Jerusalem, around Jerusalem, throughout the West Bank. They postpone things till the situation calms down, and then they do it and they carry out all their plans without any accountability in the dark. This has to stop. We know, we've seen this before. You cannot just calm the situation artificially down and say we'll postpone this.
So Hanan, just in terms of a resolution, I think the international community certainly does want a resolution. In terms of where we go from here, the Palestinian voice is obviously very divided. Palestinian Authority clearly does not have that much control over Hamas. So in terms of the political power for the Palestinians, particularly like yourself in the West Bank, what can you do to prevent more violence and bloodshed?
Yeah, I think we can call for two things: accountability for Israel, protection for Palestine. What we also need to understand is that the Palestinians are united. Palestinians everywhere. In the West Bank, there are protests. The army is assaulting Palestinians in Ramallah, in Hebron, in Nablus, everywhere. In Jerusalem, again, constant assaults. In Gaza, look at what's happening within Israel. The indigenous people, they're not Arabs, Israeli Arabs, they're the Palestinians, the original people who stayed on the land when Israel was created on their land. And Israel set up a system of systemic, legalized discrimination against them. And they're the ones who've been feeling marginalized, excluded, and oppressed within Israel, even though they have an Israeli citizenship. So let's not play games with this whole thing. There has been a situation in which all Palestinians, whether they're in exile and refugee camps, or in Israel, or in the West Bank and Jerusalem, or in Gaza, everybody, each one of us, feels the oppression and the injustice and the horror of Israeli measures, and Israel, not just the Israeli occupation. And therefore, we need to deal with the root causes, Zain. We cannot just continue to say, well, with this latest thing, what can you do? Yes, we need to see escalation. We need to see it done in accordance with international law, respect for the law, and also Israel.
And we do have to leave it there. I mean, it does feel like anytime there's a ceasefire, all that does is just postpone more violence for a few more years. So we can agree on that. Hanan Ashrawi, live for us there. Thank you so much.